Your recording.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right, so I already kind of told you about career services and mentioned who your presenters are today. We have another career coach that works with us. Her name is Geraldine Gaines, and I'm sure some of y'all are familiar with her. And then we also work with Desiree, and is it Drelato? Is that how you say it? And she is Dewey campus and also the Graham campus, and she is a completion center coach, but she also works with us as well. So like I said, we're going to start off with some resumes. We're going to go into references. We find that that's usually important for new employees. Who do I use as references? Who can I? Who should I not? All that sort of stuff. How do you put that? Letters. Talk a little bit about a portfolio and how the things that we've discussed prior feed into that and what else you can put into that. Your job search, and then some basic interview skills if we have time for that.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay from me clicking and it going to the next slide.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so what is a resume? Your resume is not to get you a job. Shocking, I know, but your resume is to get you an interview. It's your job personally when you're having those conversations, interviewing, meeting people, marketing yourself to get yourself the job. A resume is just a tool to get you in the door. It's a place for you to kind of summarize and present yourself in your best professional light. So I want you to just right off the bat realize that this is a very individualized tool. Yes, there's a structure. Yes, we'll talk about those things. But at the end of when you look at your resume, you need to be able to look at that or somebody else look at that and go, oh, they must be talking about me. It is very personalized, individualized. So please keep that in mind. And we'll kind of emphasize that throughout because lots of times with like words that catchphrases, buzzwords, things like that that are really popular, people typically kind of there's trends and everybody's using them and then they kind of all blend together, and you don't want that to happen. You really want to use words that and skills and abilities that really highlight you. And Shannon and Mark, y'all jump in as you have things to add to this. I really prefer this to just kind of be a conversation, opposed to me talking at people for a long time. So, y'all have anything else?
I mean, I think you covered it. Okay. Your resume is, a marketing tool for yourself. So you want to make it fit your skills and your personality and really tailor it towards what the employer is looking for. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So I think Perfect. You covered everything so far.
Okay, let's move on. All right, so what does it need to look like? Yes, there is a basic structure, but don't get really hung up on how your categories or topics are supposed to be presented. You need to think about what highlights me best. For a lot of students who are graduating, looks like is maybe right after your professional statement or your personal intro, maybe you start with your education, certifications. Maybe that's the most important thing. If you have a long work history, maybe your education goes a little bit further down on the list. All of those things are fluid. Things that are not fluid, things that need to be consistent, make sure that the font is really easy to read, that it's not like super big or super tiny. You have some flexibility based on how much space you're trying to cover. If you are trying to make a little look like more, if you're trying to make a lot fit on one page, all of those things can have some flexibility, but typically you're going to use a really easy to read font, something that transfers in all different programs to all different computers. You really want to have the thought of making things easy on the other end of it, like to the prospective employer. The easiest thing for them to read, get the information that they need. They don't have to hunt for things. So keep that in mind. Arial and Times New Roman are very typical, but those aren't the only ones. Those are just examples. A font that's anywhere from 10 to 12 is pretty typical. So how many pages? A lot of people talk about that. It has to be one page. It's best if it's one page. If I have one position and 75 applications and I get a resume that's 3 pages, I'm just not going to do that. So, but what's even more important than that is in that top 1/3 of the first page is that you get attention. If you don't get attention in that top 1/3 of the first page, they're never going to look at the rest. You only have a few seconds to grab their attention. So typically that's going to happen in that, I call it the most valuable real estate, which is that top 1/3 of the first page. But if you're a student, you've had just a couple or a few jobs or no jobs, it's not going to be more than 1 page. I am old and been working a long time. Mine is 2-page. But even with a lot of jobs and different things like that, I will never let it be more than that. So keep that in mind. Always, always. Go ahead, Shannon.
I'd love to jump in. So they've done some studies, and on average, employers spend less than 3 seconds looking at your resume. And so you kind of have to think about it from that perspective as well. You only have 3 seconds to capture their attention and hope that they continue reading and stay on it longer. So the layout of it and the readability of it is super important, and maybe just as important as the content that you have in there. Because if you can't even get them to read your content, then it's not going to be helpful for you. So the font size, the font you choose, the way it looks, the formatting, all of that is important too. So just keep that in mind. And as Daphne is talking about page numbers, 1 page is ideal, but if you only have 3 seconds to capture their attention, that first half or first third of your resume really needs to be a wow. And that's going to be what keeps them reading your resume longer. And that's kind of why, you don't really want to have 2 pages, because chances are they're not going to get to that second page really anyway. So you want to have your most relevant wow factor information and experience on that first page, and ideally in the first top half of that page.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a question here.
Okay, Mark.
Question is, how should we list job experiences in years?
Okay, so we'll talk about this more later, but you don't really have to go back more than 10 years. That's just kind of a general rule, but I will say a resume is not a legal document, unlike, like an application. I don't know that that's a legal document, maybe, yeah. Where you're listing and they say put it all and sign on the bottom line. This is your marketing tool. So maybe you had a very relevant work experience 15 years ago that you can talk about transferable skills or something like that, then use it. Maybe you had, jobs that didn't matter at all. And there's different ways that you can put like dates and things like that, because you want to be mindful that you don't have big gaps in your time. But if you're only listing relevant information, then or relevant work experience, which you can change a title to say that as well, then you have some flexibility there. As a general rule, you don't have to go back more than 10 years, but there is some flexibility in that. I would also say, like, if you had a job while you were in high school or something like that, unless it's super relevant, you don't need it. And you also don't need things from your high school, again, unless it's super relevant. So it's a little fluid. And I'll just say right here, y'all can all send your resumes to us to just get our eyes on them and we can review them. We can do that through email or Zoom or whatever, just to kind of check and see what you've got. We're happy to do that. That's what we're here for. But hopefully that answers your question. If not, shoot it back for some more explanation. Awesome. Make sure that you check your spelling and your grammar. Those things really matter. Typically, an employer, if they see things that are spelled wrong, I'm not trying to figure out what it is you're trying to tell me. I'm not gonna. It just shows. I mean, this is like your billboard, and you know, like I notice misspelling on commercials and stuff. Like that's not okay. Like you had one job, do it. So make sure that you are checking those spelling. Have somebody else look at it. Send it and see what it looks like on the other side. So make sure that you are really checking those things. If you are printing it, which sometimes that's, if you're going in for an interview, you need to take it with you. That's important. You can take it digitally and in a paper copy. But if you are printing it, put it on some nice paper, put it on resume paper. I know we're not physically on the campuses right now, but we have paper for you, so you don't have to go buy it. But, you know, get some friends and buy it and share it, or I don't know, whatever. But make sure that you're, again, this is a marketing tool. Treat it as such. I would also say in regards to what it should look like, that consistency is really important. So make sure that you don't have 2 or 3 different fonts. 2 may be okay. It's really kind of depends, but not a lot of different fonts. You don't have a lot of, like, it really needs to be easy to read. Important things need to be highlighted. And you need to be consistent with your bullets, with your spacing, with your margins, with all of that sort of stuff. It just is much more professional and easy to read. Shannon, Mark, what would y'all have to add to that?
Like you said, it does need to be able to grab people's attention and not be able to, like you say, frustrate somebody. You know, before I worked as a recruiter, and a lot of times you would have people have their resumes in fancy fonts, different color fonts, and for me it was really hard on my eyes. So a lot of times you want to look at things like that as well.
That's a really good point. I like that you used frustrated, because yeah, you don't want to, and it can be, you want it to be palatable for the most amount of people. So that was good. I like that description. Shannon, okay, there we go. All right. So like I've said before, there's not a one size fits all. This is a very personalized document. This is your marketing tool. And so you need to put that first and foremost at the front of your brain. Like, this needs to represent me well. And then the next piece of that is that it needs to match the position that you're seeking. There could be a situation where you have more than one resume. I like to think that if you're looking for different types of positions, then you may have different resumes for different things. Shannon, you're better at speaking to that. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I would always probably encourage having multiple resumes. I know she might disagree with me just a little bit there, but you know, I think you know, a lot of resume, getting your foot through the door, is about strategy. And so, you know, tailoring your resume for specific jobs and pulling out keywords from a job description, and making sure that those words are on your resume. I think tailoring it in that way is helpful for people, and getting through just like that first round of fire and filter that the employers go through. I will say though, you know, like Daphne was saying, you know, most of your the majority of your resume is going to be the same whether you have 2 or 3 or just 1 or whatever, because your experience and your education doesn't change. It's just about changing some of those key words, maybe some of your transferable skills, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. Um, so you're not changing your experience and your foundation, but you're just changing some of those description words. So that's what I would do is maybe just have a couple depending on what you're going to. So for you guys, for example, if you're applying to maybe a hospital position versus like a clinic or home health or something like that, you might have 2 different resumes for those 2 different types of organizations because they're going to be looking for different things. Your patients might be, different ages or different types of groups. So they might be looking for something, somebody that works better with those types of that type of population, I guess. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but
It does. I think you just need to look at the position that you're applying for and critically look at your resume and see, does it adequately reflect that position? If it doesn't, then you just need to tweak it some. And that means it may look a little different than the others. And I will say, between the 3 of us and the rest of our team, there are things that all of us have different opinions on. And I love that because I think it speaks to the individualization of your resume, and that ultimately this document represents you. And so the decisions you make on what it looks like are yours. So I think that's fantastic. All right, so let's talk about employers. They really need to get a sense of who you are through your accomplishments, your skills, your abilities, those hard skills, and then also your character, your personality, traits that are specific to you. How you present this information, how you write, the words that you use, that all starts giving a sense of who you are. And you want prospective employers to somehow obtain an emotional connection to you. Shannon talked about being really strategic, and that's part of that is beginning to make a connection with the prospective employer, because then I'm more likely to bring you in to talk to you if I feel some sort of connection, and sometimes just through a document. But what isn't hard is to get yourself eliminated. So not getting eliminated because of the little things like it's hard to read, or you're making me work for it, or I can't figure out how to contact you, or there's a lot of misspelling. I mean, that's an easy way for me to eliminate. Again, I want you to consider, especially in this job market, there's a lot of people applying for every position that's open. And so one of your first goals is don't get my resume put in the trash, right? So that's kind of that bottom bar, and then we go up from there. You also want to make sure that you remember that this is a professional document. Your whole professional portfolio is all professional documents. Your cover letter, your resume, your references, anything else that you add to that, and it should be presented as such. One thing that's important is to use buzzwords and key phrases. I noticed that we had a question about that, and we're going to go really into depth about this in a minute, because it really is important, especially when we're talking about ATS, which is an applicant tracking system. Most likely you are going to upload your resume into a database through some sort of like Indeed or Glassdoor, or even through their website or something like that. Sidebar, it's always better to go to the employer's website to apply as opposed to applying through one of those big things. But we'll talk about that more later too. But so make sure that you are catching some of those buzzwords and key phrases. And again, we're going to talk about that a lot more. So stop there. You always want to research the employer and emphasize how your skills match with their values. And I believe we're going to talk about this more. Shannon, not yet. Okay. So I won't talk about this too much, but that's a really thing to do, is to research your employers. That can be hard. So start with researching the ones you really want to go to. Like if you're applying to a lot of places, it's hard to know a whole lot about a whole lot of people, but start with the ones you're really interested in and then go from there. But you do need to do some research about those and see what their mission is, what their values are, and how you align with that. Okay, so real quick, just because this is super, super important. Again, we're going to talk about this more later, and then I'm going to stop saying that phrase because I've already said it a bunch. But applicant tracking software, ATS, when you upload your resume to any web-based format that you are submitting your resume to, it is highly likely that it is an ATS filtering system. If you don't have the right buzzwords, those key phrases, things that they've said in the job posting that are critical, key, or required, if those things aren't in the resume, your resume is never going to make it to a decision-making human. Like nobody will ever see it. We get so many people who say, I've applied all kinds of places, I don't even get any phone calls. Well, what that cues us to say is it's probably not making it through that software. Another thing that keeps those from passing through are tables, graphs, text boxes, anything that is housed within those in your resume don't get read. It's like it's in a bubble and it's not even seen. So lots of times people like to pull, and we even have some that we work with that are kind of resume templates. And while those are really great, it's a template and you need to put it into a clean format when you're going to use it, right? It's just kind of a guide. Because when you start plugging information into those text boxes, it's not going to be read by an applicant tracking software system. It won't filter through. And again, your resume will never be seen by a decision-making human. It will put in the trash by a decision-making computer system. So keep that in mind. And if you have more questions about that, I'm pretty sure we'll talk about that more in a minute. I said I wasn't going to say that anymore. Shannon, Mark, anything y'all want to add to that? And I would just add right here, if you don't have if you're not on mute, if you could do that so that we get less feedback. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that you explained that really well. Employers use the ATS to, usually that's their first line of defense. So like she was saying, and so they usually use that to filter out like just basic minimum qualifications. But sometimes with those basic minimum qualifications, they're using, certain specific words that they're looking for. Like, so let's say just as an example, they want somebody that is good at public speaking. I know this probably isn't relevant for your career, but just as an example, bear with me. So like, let's say they want somebody that is good at public speaking. Well, if you don't have the word public speaking on your resume, it's not going to get through that system. And so, you might have that skill, you might, tell them all about it once you get to the interview, but if it's not on your resume, you're not going to even get to that point. And so to kind of combat that and to know what words to use, your best option is pulling those words from the job. Also do some research on the company to kind of get a better idea of their culture, get a better idea of what type of person works there, who, what their business is, who they serve. You can look at all these different things to kind of get a better idea of those skills and those traits and those attributes that they're looking for, to make sure that those are on your resume. And I know that's kind of a hard guideline to use because it is so broad, but that's something that we'd be more than happy to help you with and kind of walk you through to show you how to find those keywords. I know somebody asked that question earlier, so the keywords are going to differ depend on what your specific skills are and what your traits are, but there are certain things that you do want to have on your resume just based off of what they're looking for.
Right. Yeah. And we are going to talk more about that. And then we also have a couple of kind of cheat sheet sort of thing you off, get you thinking about those. And I'm not sure, Nick, if that's something that you've already uploaded for them, but those are in that career lab, and you can include those for the students. So there was something you said I wanted to add to.
I was gonna say also, we're gonna also show them a tool where they can line up their resume with the job description to kind of see what their resume is actually missing versus what the job description is asking for as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. I was going to say, you mentioned in your job search, and this just came to mind, so I want to make sure. When you find a job anywhere that it's posted that you are interested in, you need to save that job description. That has very important information. And let's say, for instance, that you are looking on an online job board and you run across it and you apply for it, and then you need to make sure, like, if that job is taken down, like, that you still have access to that. So save it somewhere, print it up, something like that. That has valuable information. And then, yes, like Mark said, we're going to share with you a tool that Mark has found that helps you kind of test your resume to see if it meets those guidelines. Go to the next one, Shannon.
I just want to address, there's a question in the chat real quick. It says, what if your work history is lacking because you have a stay-at-home mom? How would you grab the hiring employer's attention? That's a great question. And I'll just say, a lot of times, especially students, undervalue the skills that they have. You're in school right now, you're learning, you're working on new skills, you're developing things. So don't undervalue those things that you're learning now. So even though you've been a stay-at-home mom, focus on the skills that you have now that you're learning in school now. And that's what the employer will want to see.
Well, and also don't undervalue the skills that you've gained from being a stay-at-home mom. I mean, that's not easy, and there's so many what is called transferable skills. And again, when we're talking about those buzzwords and things, then we'll talk more about that. But there are valuable skills that you have, and so go ahead and start thinking about those. The organization skills, the conflict management, whatever those things are that you're bringing to the table because of where you're at right now. I absolutely agree with Shannon. I think that many times most of us tend to minimize what we bring to the table, devalue some of that. And so, which that's like my favorite part of this job, and helping people do their resume is really helping them see all that they are, because typically we minimize ourselves, we devalue our skills and abilities. And so all of those things, transferable skills that you bring to the table, it's more than just work experience. I mean, there's a lot. It's your life experience that you are sharing and marketing, and that is valuable. Sorry, Shannon, I stepped on your toes.
No, that was great. There was something, we did a presentation last week too, and there was something that Daphne said that really kind of resonated with me. And she was saying that, whenever you graduate from your program, you're not just a recent graduate or a recent student or whatever, you're a nurse, so you got to think about from that perspective too, not focusing on I'm just a student or I'm just a recent graduate or whatever it may be at the time you're applying. But think about what you do have. You have those skills. You're ready to be in that environment. So just, I mean, it all goes back to just don't undervalue what you have. Anyway, I like that you said that, so I just wanted to share.
Yeah, and that, and thank you. Yeah, we use that kind of just in a very language as a new graduate. Don't say that. Don't draw attention to that. When you're done with this program and you are a nurse, I think you have to take a test or something. I'm not positive, but so that's your starting point. As a nurse, not as a new nurse, as a recent graduate, as a nurse, high. And so, yeah, I think that's really important to just begin to really be, I mean, it's not easy. What y'all do is not easy. A lot of people can't do it. And to really stand firm in that. And so, yeah, I have soapboxes I'm going to try not to get onto. So, all right, let's move on.
I want to add one thing also.
Yes.
When I went to my last graduate school program, one of our instructors told us every semester that we were in that class actually represented real world experience. And we could actually put that on our resume as experience. And with the students here, they have go through clinicals. I think that can be counted as real world experience as well. You know, she very highlighted that a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll talk about how to represent that clinical experience as well as the other stuff. Yeah, that's good. So it is important as you do this resume, and I know all right now we're just talking about getting started with it. We haven't even really dug into it, but that's a big part of it, is kind of thinking about what this document means and what it will represent. And but you need to think like the prospective employer. Think like a boss. Think like this person that you hope is going to hire you. What are their needs? What are they looking for? It is great to be someone who wants to learn and grow, like we all want that, but that can't be the emphasis. We see a lot of resumes that, you know, they start out with this as a new, as being new to this field. I'm looking for a place that I can grow my skills and learn. Okay, that's a red flag to me as a prospective employer, because yes, you want to learn and grow. You probably wouldn't have been in school if you didn't. And so what need are you going to meet for me as the prospective employer? Anybody who hires you is making an investment in you. And so what am I going to get from my investment? And you have to kind of have that thought process of what you are bringing to the table, what an investment in you means to that employer. And besides just a monetary investment, I mean, it costs, I don't remember what the statistics are of, like, to bring somebody new on board is like 200% of the actual employee cost, like just that onboarding, beginning, training, all stuff. So there's that investment, and then just in the you know, having you on this team. So so what are the employer's needs for any given position? And then you've heard us talk a lot, and this is important, aside from your technical skills, what positive qualities do you have that differentiate you from your classmates? So you need to already right now be thinking about what about me is just a cut above? How am I a little bit different, right? What do I do a little bit better than other people? And that's okay to do. You get to do that. We all have gifts, skills, and abilities. We all are different, and we all bring great things to the table. But you need to notice what those are in yourself. When you graduate from this program, there is a level of knowledge that it is assumed that you know, right? And it's assumed that everybody knows it. So those technical skills, the things that you learn in the program, that's your base. It is assumed that you have those skills, or you would not have graduated or passed a test, or, you know, whatever. And so now the next piece. And I'm just going to say right now, we see all the time in especially healthcare resumes that, and it's a beautiful thing. There's nothing bad or wrong with this. Like, I want to care for people. I want to give back. I'm passionate about helping people. That's great. But everybody says that. Everybody says that. So what's next? How do you do that? What does that look like to you? So just keep that in mind too. Thinking like the employer, what do I want to see? I want to see who you, and sidebar, we don't hire who we don't like. So make yourself, like Mark was saying, palpable to a broader audience. And y'all jump in, Mark and Shannon, if I'm missing anything. What are your strengths for the job, and how can you emphasize them? Shannon, we are going to talk more about that, or is this where I need to do that?
We talk it, it's up to you.
Okay.
When we go through it, we talk about the strengths.
Okay, sorry, Shannon made the PowerPoint, so I'm just checking. What are your strengths for the job? I feel like I keep saying we're going to talk about this, so I feel like we need to talk about this. So when you are discussing, and I think, who was it? Maybe Cheyenne, you asked this question. So listen up now. We're fixing to talk about keywords, buzzwords, things like that. You hear kind of those trends. I'm a team player. I'm a hard worker. I'm a self-motivated. All of those things. Again, none of that. All of that is good. But you will stand apart when you can give deeper relevance to those things. So, for instance, and I'm going off the cuff here, so I am a team player. Okay, lots of people like to say that. First of all, don't say something that you're not. If you're not a team player, don't say you are. That's probably unlikely in the nursing field, but what else? So I am considerate of others. I am open to discussing options. I have a strong, but I appreciate the opinions of others. All of those things kind of play into what it's like to be a team player, but it is more personalized. If you were to want to say that you are motivated, okay, good. Again, you are probably motivated to get through school. That's not an easy thing, but are you, what else? So I am, maybe I'm super dedicated. Maybe I'm loyal. Maybe I am, I don't know, I'm running out of adjectives. The idea is to just more deeply describe yourself. Anytime you can quantitatively or qualitatively provide information, that is beneficial. So, for instance, I cared for the daily needs of elderly patients. Okay, that's great. How many? How many did you care for? What did that include? Did you build relationships with them? Did you, going a little bit deeper to explain, I gave personalized care to 25 bed wing, and something like that. So it's emphasizing the details that better explain you, your skills, and your experience. I feel like I want Shannon and Mark to kind of talk a little bit more about this, because I'm talking a lot.
No, I think you're doing great. I think just to kind of reiterate what you said, whenever you're using description words like that, like you're motivated or you're a team player, just go into more why. What makes you that? What about that makes you better than the person sitting next to you in your class? How are you a better team player than they are? And that's kind of what I would focus on. And that's, I know Daphne kind of already mentioned that, but that piece is an important piece, because otherwise it's just words on a page, and if everybody puts that I'm a team player, I'm a team player, I'm a team player, it starts to not mean very much. So you want to put the how. What makes you different? How are you a team player? How are you a better team player? So think about those things.
Yeah. And I know some people get upset where they go, okay, well, they don't really like to think like how they're better than other people, but you are competing for a position. So, keep that in mind. And just because you're really good at something it's not being negative or hurtful to anybody else. They're good at things you're not. So, but what are your strengths? What are the things in you? What are you gifted with, right? Okay, and then what are your weaknesses as far as the position is concerned? You need to know what those are and be able to talk about them when asked. Don't bring them up. Don't be the person that brings it to the table. But you need to know what might my deficits be in this, and be able to address them if it comes up, and how. So every trait that you have has a reciprocal. This was life-changing for me when I figured it out, 6 minutes ago. I'm teasing, but if you are, let's say you have a trait that you don't like about yourself. We all have them. It is likely, if you explore that trait, there is a reciprocal to that is fantastic about you, right? So I'll use myself as an example. I am, I don't know, making myself very vulnerable. I talk a lot. I don't know if y'all can tell that. I talk a lot, and I'm very opinionated. And sometimes that can be hard. But, the reciprocal of that is that I am passionate, and I love that about myself. And I love opinions of other people, like very curious and those sorts of things. So kind of look at the opposite. Maybe you are really shy and quiet. Maybe the reciprocal for you, and again, everybody's different, but maybe that means you pay really close attention. Maybe you are observant, you have a depth to yourself that you really understand people or something like that. So think about those things just in life. If you ever kind of get in a place where you're, ruminating on something that you don't like about yourself, think about the opposite of that. Chances are it's something that you really appreciate and love about yourself, is something that you, anyway. Woo, talk about
jump in.
Yeah.
So we offer an assessment called Strengths Quest.
Yes.
This is kind of where I had the same realization that Daphne is sharing with you guys, because it's a test that you take, and it gives you your top 5 strengths. And all of you guys can take it. Just reach out to us, and we'll get you a code. But anyway, in my top 5, it gave me one, and I don't remember what it was. Otherwise, I would tell you. But it gave me one, and I was like, I always saw that as a negative in myself, until I started reading more, and it spun it into a positive.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of eye-opening for me to realize, like Daphne was saying, like there is, an opposite trait to your negative traits. There's something good that you do, to balance out the negative, I guess. I'm not explaining this well again, but
Yeah, for sure.
But that Strengths Quest assessment can help you a lot. Not only give you that little boost of confidence in yourself, but also it'll give you some great words that you can put on your resume that a lot of other people won't have.
Yeah.
So I highly encourage you to reach out and take that test. It's really fun. We all love it. We've all taken it.
Yeah, this is something that NCTC we do with all of our employees. You might see it's in our signature lines. I put it on my personal letterhead, all of those things, and you can put those as an identifier on your resume, and it's free for you. And it's easy. Like, you just email us, we'll send you a code. You have to have a code to get it for free, because otherwise it's expensive. And then you'll get those top 5, and you can use those. But it does give you a lot of information about them, and so we're happy to let you do that as well. And it gives you some of those next level buzzwords, descriptors to use in your resume, and also good for some self-reflection. Okay, so we've pounded this. Let's move on a little bit. And again, so just don't focus on being a student or recent graduate. There's nothing wrong with that. but you don't want that to be the thought that lingers. You don't want that to be your your entry. You want it to be that these are the skills and the traits that I have. We go to the next one, Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, here's a resume. Whoop whoop. All right. Mark, are we good on questions? Nothing so far? Nothing else?
Nothing else. Yeah, nothing else so far. Yeah.
Okay, so we're just going to kind of go right through this. Starting off with your name on a resume, it does not have to be your birth certificate name. It's best if it's the name that you use. Especially if your email has your name in it, and if they're different, that gets a little bit confusing. You want to think about spoon feeding information, like you're making this as easy as possible for the prospective employer. You are one of many in this pool of people looking for this job. Not having to fight to figure it out, it helps. So don't minimize that. So it's important that your name and your contact information is right up front, easy to see, read, find. So make sure that it's right there up front, center. Address. This is another place that some of us disagree, and I love that. I don't want an address on a resume. I don't even want the city and the state unless it helps you. And there are, in my opinion, some very rare occurrences where it helps you. But if I am hiring for one position and I have 75 applications and it is in Frisco and you live in Decatur, my mind goes to that commute and that you're always going to be late, and that's going to be a problem for me. Maybe you're the most punctual person in the world and you're 30 minutes early everywhere you go, and that's not an issue for you. But I don't know that yet. I don't know you yet. So it gives me a negative thought. So keep that in mind. I know Shannon likes the city, state, and zip. And I see your point. Like if you're really close and it helps, okay. But that's just a difference of opinion. There's absolutely no reason in the world to put your full physical address. They're not going to send you snail mail. They don't need to know where you live. And it can be weird. Like we were doing some reviews, and like I'm reviewing somebody that lives right next door to someone I know. They don't do that. Felt weird. I don't need to know where you live. I don't know. Anyway, we don't need it.
And also, just as a security measure too, putting like your street address, like 555 Cherry Lane or whatever it may be, you're sending your resume out digitally now. So it's hard to know how many eyes and who's looking at it. And so just as a security measure, we've been taking that off because you don't want to just share a document with anybody and everybody that has your name and your address and your phone number and all this information about you. So it's just
here's how to find me.
Yeah, just one step back. So I think that helps. And like Daphne said, I do like keeping city, state, and zip. I think employers like to know, how far away you are, or if you live in that city or anything like that. But that's your personal preference. If you want to keep it, you can keep it, and if you want to take it off, you take it off.
Yeah. And that's kind of my point. Employers do like to know because they want to make judgments and assumptions about your punctuality. And so I say, don't give them that reason to even do that. Have that conversation in person once they know you and you've had this opportunity to connect with them. So I get kind of passionate about it, so I'll back off though. And then your phone number and your email, it doesn't matter what order. I would just, make sure that you're looking at it and it feels good and it looks good. But here's the thing about phone numbers, and this may seem like a very small thing, but I promise you that it's not, because ultimately a prospective employer, one position, 75 applications, I'm looking for reasons to eliminate. That's my first pass. Who can I get rid of? So be consistent. Dashes, dots, lines, slants, whatever you're going to do, be consistent in that. And the number that's on here, format needs to look exactly the same as the format on your cover letters and your references and in any other documents that you have. That is professional consistency. So make sure that you do that. And your email, there's debate also about whether you hyperlink that or you don't. And so that, again, we're just going to say is a personal preference. But since you're sending it digitally, if I can click it and directly go to your email, man, that's handy. But there is some conversation that you need to get rid of hyperlinks. So I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's a thing.
Just make sure they're professional.
Yes.
Professional voicemail greeting, professional email address.
Right.
I've seen some that have come through and they're like, hot mama at Gmail or whatever. I mean, they're not that bad, but you'd be surprised at what email addresses people are comfortable sharing. So you just got to think from an employer's perspective. If you have a candidate that has a hot mama email address or whatever it may be, like, that does not come across as professional, and that's probably an immediate reason to throw your resume away. So
right.
I know I see some of y'all laughing in the chat. I've seen it happen, and maybe not to that extent, but I have seen numerous unprofessional emails come through on resumes. So just make sure that you double check yours. If you don't have one, it's free to sign up on Gmail or Yahoo or whatever. Use your name if you can. It's okay to have numbers in there, but just make sure that it's professional.
Right. Yeah, and maybe as you're doing your job search, you want an email that you're only using for job search to kind of streamline that. That's not a horrible idea if you're going to remember it. I will say on your student email, I personally do not recommend using it for a couple of reasons. One, at some point your student email will end. And so they say that it ends the semester that you graduate. It just depends on how quickly they update that information or not. And I know some that have gone on, longer, but it could end. And so you need to keep that in mind. It also emphasizes your student status as opposed to your professional status. And so, so I always recommend a different email. Also on the phone, you need to have your voicemail set up and it doesn't need to be full. If I can't leave you a message, you're not going to get in to speak to me, right? If I am the prospective employer and I get your voicemail, which is fine, but then it says, this box has not been set up, or this box is full. Okay, you missed that opportunity. So you need to get all that stuff straight right up front. We suggest that you have a LinkedIn, that you upload your resume on the LinkedIn, and that you make that searchable. There are a plethora of nursing recruiters that use LinkedIn, that look for people on that. That's just a kind of almost a passive way for you to do job search. And so if you do your LinkedIn page and upload your resume, that's a good thing. Go in though and change your URL. Everybody can do it. It's going to assign all these weird numbers and letters when it's really simple for you to go in and just change it to your name on your setup page. So if you can't figure that and want to shoot us an email, give us a call. We'll talk you through that. Super easy, but don't have that. And then you can hyperlink it. And then you can also put a hyperlink for a digital portfolio or a personal website if you happen to have that is relevant. Then you can use it. Anything else on headings? I hear somebody kind of talking. Henry Storms, can you mute your computer? Perfect. Okay. All right, Shannon, Mark, anything else on that personal header lead-in info?
We'll talk a little bit more about LinkedIn and then the digital portfolios in just a little bit. So if y'all have questions about that, I know I've done a couple presentations recently and a lot of people didn't know what LinkedIn was. So we'll go through that and talk about that.
Okay, good.
And I just, to add on to what Shannon said, I'm one of those who also prefer someone does put their city, state, and zip code on their resume. Because I worked as a recruiter before, and one of the things that we used to do is like we would, when we were looking to find people for a certain position, we would put in we had certain keywords that we had to look for. Then we would punch in the city, state, zip code. Then we would punch in a number for a radius, and then it would give us resumes of people in the radius. So that's why I always suggest that people at least put the city, state, and zip code.
I'm outnumbered. But this is a place too where I could see that you might do a different resume for like LinkedIn or one that you submit to recruiting or something, as opposed to a more personalized, that you might have it on that so that it's in those radius searches.
Right.
Good. Oh,
Yeah, for the applicant tracking systems, yeah.
Okay. All right. So next is we talked about that top 1/3 being the most valuable real estate, and it really is. This is the place to really catch attention. Nobody uses objectives anymore, so don't use the title name of objective, and don't use the format of an objective. Old school objectives were basically, I'm looking for a job in this, and this is what I want. So one thing is, that's obvious. You're looking for a job in that field, and so you don't need to state that. You're applying for that job. You submitted it, so you don't need to, be redundant in that. And the objective was basically, it just kind of said the job title that you were applying for again, and it didn't have a lot of purpose. And it was anyway. We don't do that. Nobody does that. So where you want to start is with a professional summary. And so this is the first place where you get that opportunity to kind of start selling yourself. And you can title it professional summary. You don't have to title it at all. Again, this is a place where you have some flexibility to do all different kinds of things. But this is a place where you really, it's just all about you and the most important things about you, right? So these are the buzzwords. These are those skills and abilities. If you did Strengths Quest, it's in here. If you're bilingual, that's very marketable. You want that right up front. So this is a place where a lot of ATS stuff is going to be grabbed, and a lot of really personalized skills and abilities. Shannon, will you take that over a second?
Sure. Yeah, like she said that, so you can kind of play with this a little bit. People have the tendency, and this used to be really common for resumes, but to talk about, I'm looking for a position as an LVN where I could grow and develop my skills. Well, from an employer perspective, it's great that you want to develop your skills, but what are you bringing to the table for me as an employer? And so that's where this professional summary, we've kind of shifted from an objective to a professional summary. And again, you can kind of title this, I've seen it called summary of qualifications, profile, professional summary. Some people don't even title it. It's just like a statement at the top of your resume. Any of those ways that you want to do it is perfectly fine. But this, if you'll read it on here, you'll see that it focuses more on some of the skills that you're bringing to the table. So this one, for example, driven bilingual licensed vocational nurse student expecting to graduate August 2020 with a 3.8 GPA. Prioritizes communication and patient care, skilled at prioritizing tasks and maintaining composure under pressure, strong ability to think independently, problem solve, and coordinate with a team. So you'll see there's a lot of information packed in those 3 sentences right there. And it tells the employer a much bigger, better picture than I'm looking to grow and develop my skills with your company. So I know I can't see your faces, but hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to type it in the chat. And then we can also work one-on-one with you after this presentation, and then upcoming weeks. And if you want help, writing this section, or if you want more ideas for this section, just let us know. We'd be happy to help you with that. Mark, do you have anything to add?
I was going to say also, this also kind of allows you to overshadow or address like the question that the person had, what if your history is lacking because you're a stay-at-home mom? Well, you can address that here, or you can totally take the focus off of that by giving a very strong professional summary, because in this one here, this person listed, the skills that they're bringing to the table, and they're listing if they focused on the job description, they can tell exactly what the job description is looking at, and they can also tell what they bring to the table that addresses the skills they're looking for in the job description. So a lot of times you can use this area to just overshadow things that you feel that may be some of your shortcomings.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and skip on to the next one. So on the example resume, you'll see under the professional summary, there's the licensure and certifications. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but we're going to go ahead and skip down to education first. So for your education section, you want to make sure that you're putting the full name of your degree or certification that you're getting. There's a tendency to focus on the school or the organization where you earned that certificate or degree, but really the focus should be on what degree or program that you're graduating from, or your whatever certification that you're earning. So for you guys, it's the licensed vocational nursing. That's what you should focus on. And so you'll see in the example how that part is bolded, and then they have the expected graduation date on there. If you've already graduated, you can put the month and year of your graduation, or if your graduation's upcoming, then you could put the expected month and year that you'll be graduating. On here, we do have the location, just as an example, Gainesville. That part is not necessarily mandatory, especially, since North Central Texas College kind of gives you the location and the name of the school. So we put that on there. It's typical that you'll see that on there, but if you don't have room to put that, then that part is kind of, your personal preference. And I see a couple comments coming through. Just one second. Oh, Daphne's answering some questions. Okay.
Yeah, so I answered one question. It was a really good question. Sorry, they're mowing my lawn, so hopefully that's not too loud. But it said that in that professional summary, it mentions that they're a nursing student. So it's really important if you, and Shannon just kind of mentioned this too, if you haven't graduated yet, you need to be really clear about that. So that's probably why this says student expecting to graduate. I probably would have left that as licensed vocational nurse expecting to graduate in, and just kind of left out that student word. But it's a balance there, because you need to be really clear and honest about where you're at. You also want to keep in mind what words linger after you've read that. So if the professional summary is really strong, that's probably not something they're going to focus on. So it's just kind of that balance. But that was a really good question.
Yeah, and I think too with this example, it's, yes, I'm a student, I'm getting ready to graduate, but bam, 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 here are all the skills I'm bringing to you. So it's not
for sure.
Just student, I don't have any experience, hire me, please. It's not, it doesn't come across that way. It's strong. Right. It's I can't find my words today for some reason, but it's
I see what you're saying. I agree. There's a lot of content there. There's a lot of strength there. And so that word student kind of fades into the background, and you didn't start the paragraph with that. It didn't start as a student expecting to graduate in August. That's a different intro as driven bilingual licensed vocational nurse expecting to graduate in August. that gives a different feeling and a different focus. So again, write that, have somebody read it, ask them what stands out to them, send it to us, let us look at it, all of those sorts of things. So I see where the question came from, absolutely, but I think that there's a lot of meat in that. There's a lot of really good skills, and even where the sentence ends, strong ability to think independently, problem solve, and coordinate with a team. You see how that coordinate with the team is saying you're a team player without saying you're a team player? That's a really good sentence, descriptive. And it doesn't get kind of lost in the minutia of being a team player. So that's really good.
Great question.
There's another question that says, what is the best place to create a resume?
NCTC Career Services Center. So you can get templates. We have Optimal Resume, which is a service that we purchase. You can get there by going to nctc.edu and going to the Career Services page. And then there's a link right there that you can get to it, or you can email any of us or call any of us, whatever, and we'll, there's even some templates. And again, Nick, I'm not sure if that's something that you provided in that documentation that I linked you to, but you can use those. You have to remember that those templates have those, oftentimes they have those boxes and tables and that kind of formatting that's not going to make it through ATS. So it's a great starting place. I would say that this example that Shannon has here up on the screen is just as good a template as that. Like, you don't really need those kind of boxes to give you that sort of stuff. Oftentimes when you use those, it looks like you use those. So Word, or that's a really good place to start, is just to begin building it.
Yeah, and if you don't have a whole lot of strong skills in Word, please reach out to us. That's something that we can help you with. I have a couple templates. I think Mark might have some too, but usually when we work with students on resumes, I know for me and Daphne, we open up a Word document, like a blank document, and just start it and format it as we go. That's a great place to do that. I know, everybody's skill in Word varies a little bit, so that might be challenging for some of you, but that's something that we'd be more than happy to help you with. So just feel free to reach out. I know I keep saying that, but we mean
it. And then sidebar, I'm sorry, Shannon.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
So sidebar, it's a great place to just start developing it in a Word document and then save it as a Word and a PDF. When you upload them on any kind of format, typically that's going to be PDF, but it's just easier for me to edit in a Word.
And I'll just jump in real quick and oh, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead. I would say also in Career Lion, it does allow us to create it and then save it either as a Word document or PDF. And then if you also need to edit it after the fact, you can do that too.
Yes, you can do that. Career Lion, for those that don't know, is our online job board and career services. There's a lot of information in there and things like that. And it has a place to go in and create from a template or upload your resume. I will say that we are switching platforms, and so and that switch is going to happen in September. We're super excited because we're getting Handshake, and even if y'all are already graduating, you can use that as an alumnus. And so there's a lot more options and exposure in that format. So that is definitely a place that you're going to want to upload your resume, just like you would any other job board, and utilize that, because those employers that are on that platform are seeking to hire our students. So as opposed to going to like Glassdoor or Indeed or whatever, this is specifically targeting our students and other college students. So keep that in mind too. Great point, Mark.
All right. So we were talking about formatting just a little bit. There is a little bit of a tendency for people to want to make a really pretty designy type resume. And I would say that that's not necessarily necessary unless you're going into that type of artsy design field. Yes, they look nice. Yes, it helps it stand out. But at the end of the day, if you can't get through that applicant tracking software, the ATS, it doesn't matter what it looks like. So just a format like we have up on as the example, it's structured nice and it's black and white and it's not very pretty, it's not designy, but this is a great resume that'll get through that ATS. It'll increase your odds of getting to an actual human being looking at your resume, whereas those designy ones won't. A lot of those designy ones use graphics and tables and all sorts of things that aren't read by that software. And so it would be better to have a well formatted one that's not as pretty than to have the pretty one that stands out.
Right. And oftentimes those don't look the same on the other side. So always when you're done, email it to yourself, email it to a friend or mentor who will look at it and make sure you know what it looks like on the other side. A lot of that graphic stuff just gets muddled in that process. So you need to know what it's going to look like on the other side. Also, I would say know your audience. So your resume is going to be reviewed by a nursing supervisor who is probably really busy. There are, traits that are pretty consistent in all nurses. And so, not everybody, but, just some of those caring, hardworking, dedicated, but also organized and some of those sorts of things. So who's reading it? Are they going to care that it's frilly? Are they going to care that they can get the information and move on to the next thing? So think about that as well. I have a quick question before we go on, Shannon and Mark, because my granddaughter was doing some stuff. Did y'all talk a little bit about GPAs and that sort of stuff?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just mention it now. GPA on your resume, do not put a GPA on your resume unless it's a 3.5 or above. That's just kind of that's kind of the bar. So if it's a 3.5 or above, then you can. If it's a 3.8 or above, then you want to. Okay, that's just, and again, that's somewhat of opinion, but also good advice.
And it's not that anything lower than a 3.5 is bad. That's still a great GPA. It's just you don't want that to be the thing that weeds you out from your competition. Like if you have a 3.4 and the person next to you has a 3.5, that's still really close in number, but maybe they'll pick the 3.5 over you just because they're trying to weed you out. So you don't want that to be the reason why. So that's why we usually say 3.5 and up. Continue on with the education section?
Yeah, if you would, because I'm still a little discombobulated about where we're at. So
sure, that's okay. Sure. Okay, so we talked about adding the name of the degree. We talked about focusing on that instead of the school. You do want to add the full name of your school on there. I've seen some people put NCTC instead of North Central Texas College. You need to spell it all the way out. And we talked about location. We talked about the graduation date. GPA, if you have any honors, so if you made the dean's list, if you are in the honors program or honors whatever, make sure those things are listed underneath your education. That could include, if you're, I can't think of anything at the moment, but if you're in like the honor society, dean's list, anything like that, make sure that those are listed under here because those are very good accomplishments that you have that'll help set you apart from your competition.
Right. Also, like the Student Nursing Association, if you were active in it, I know like lots of times maybe you're just in it, but if you're active, if you held a officer position or something like that, that's really good information to have on here. It may go in your education section. You may create another place if you have a lot of those types of engagement. So keep that in mind as well.
All right, and then relevant coursework and projects. This doesn't mean list out every class that you've taken that's relevant. This means if you've done any special projects or if you've had, an extra class that you took that's super relevant to the field that you want to get into, you can add those in there. For you guys, it's going to be your clinicals. And so you can either list that underneath your education, or you can list that in work experience, or you can have that your clinical experience in its own section. And we'll go through and talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But I just wanted to note that here too. So yes, you can add some of your courses in there if they're relevant, but really for you guys, it's probably going to be more focused on your clinical experience.
Yeah, and just to be very clear, your clinical experience needs to be identified as clinical experience, not work experience. So like you'll see the next category in this, this example resume says work experience. If you title that differently and it says relevant experience, then you could include it, but you need to be very clear that it was a clinical experience, how many hours or how long you were there, and for the program, opposed to listing it as a job. So you can very well put that up in your education and include it there. Again, that's kind of just some of the fluidity and how you're best represented. And people in the same programs and the same courses will do it different because it just works better for some people in certain ways. And but I just wanted to be clear that you have to really identify it as clinical experience. Go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, and on this example that we have on I believe the next slide, it'll show you how we have the clinical experience broken down on this resume. So I'll show you that as we go. But I know some of you are coming into this program and going out of this program with work experience. And so I wanted to note this section as well. A lot of times this is a section that employers will look for. Since you're graduating from a specific program, that like a specific trade, this, in my opinion, probably won't be as important as your clinical experience and your education. But it could still be relevant and still be helpful for you if you do have some related experience. So on this example, like we have a caregiver example, and that would be relevant because it's still in the healthcare field. It's good experience that you have that can be transferred into your new position. And so similar to education, so you want to focus on your title rather than the company that you worked for. This one, I do see that it is flipped backwards, so ignore that. We'll have to go in that example and fix that later. But the emphasis should be on caregiver rather than the company that it was at. So
and let me just add right there. That is a very common mistake of what you're emphasizing. And I'm sure you spoke to this. Sorry, I was kind of distracted, but in this example, the licensed vocational nurse is what's highlighted in bold as opposed to the institution, and same thing in your work experience and everything else. Like you need to be the part that's highlighted, not the institution or the company. So that's a super common mistake. So just, it's an easy fix though.
Absolutely. And so, like I mentioned with the education, just make sure everything's spelled out. Don't abbreviate things. You can add the location on there. The location for your work experience will be more important than the location for your education. So I would add the location for your work experience. You can abbreviate Texas or whatever the state is, that's fine if you need to save some room. Just don't abbreviate the company name or your job title or whatever that important information is.
Let me speak to right here about like the dates. Be consistent on your dates. Some people get hung up on, I don't know what date I started, I don't know what date I actually left. Just put the month and the year, that's fine. But then be consistent with that. Consistent as in, are you using commas? Are you not? Are you spelling it out? Are you abbreviating? Whatever that is, a lot of that will have to do with your spacing and how you're trying to fit it on a page. the most important thing is that you're consistent in that it's easy to read, it's easy on the eyes. So, so make sure that you're doing that. Also, again, I'm not sure if you've mentioned to do things reverse chronologically. So you're doing the most recent thing first and you work backwards. And that's true for lots of things. Let's say you have more education than this certification that you're getting right now. If you let's say you already have a bachelor's degree or even a master's degree, or you have other certifications, maybe you did some phlebotomy or CNA or CMA or something like that. Make sure that those are also in reverse chronological. So just really consistent in order, placement, and in the information that you put in. Now, I said consistent, but when you get to work experience, let's say that you've had 3 jobs as a caregiver. Don't list the same things as bullets for 3 times and be super redundant and waste space. So if that's the case, there's different ways that you can do it. You can even do all the work experience in the titles, and then the tasks and the skills can kind of be separate. You got to be really careful with that, though. That's probably something we would want to help you with. But if it's the same, you just don't want to have these same 3, 4, or 5 bullets that you did, and they're exactly the same for 3 different jobs. That's not a good use of the real estate. Go ahead, Shannon. I'm sorry.
Nope, that's good. Okay, so on here, so we have the date range. If you're still in the position, you can put, June 2018 to present or whatever your date is. But if the job ended, put the month and year that it ended. And then she mentioned the bullet points. I do have another slide that explains bullet points just a little bit better. But I just wanted to show you this as an example. So their first one is assisted 10 patients with bathing, dressing, maintaining personal hygiene, moving in bed, and standing and walking. So you see how they added the number in there, the 10. So they took care of 10 patients, and then they put what they did with those patients. So I've seen a lot of times where bullet points are just, cared for patients, or I don't know, caregiver. They just left it like that. They didn't really explain what they did. This bullet point gives a more well-rounded idea of what the tasks that you did, what they looked like. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide too.
It also starts with an action. Is that a verb? Action, verb, or an adjective? Like assisted, monitored, supervised, completed. Those kind of, what was the action? It's much more engaging and interesting when you use those types of words.
It looks like Caitlin asked a question, is it better to spell out the number 10 versus 10? Does that make a difference? In my opinion, I would say always use the number, so the 10, instead of spell it out. I think that helps draw attention to it. And I think it just, it takes up a little bit less space too. So I like using the number always, because their eye goes to that, oh, what was that 10 about? What were they doing, with that number? And so I think it gives a little bit more oomph to the bullet point.
I agree with that. I think I'm more apt to use the numerical representation, like the 10. But I think it's more important to just be consistent in what you do. I wouldn't do a 10, but then the next time you spell out 2 or 20 or whatever. So, but I do agree with what Shannon said. Good question, Caitlin. Thank you. Mark, how do you feel about it?
I would go with the number as well, because it draws more attention to it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So bullet points. So you're going to be using bullet points underneath your work experience, under your clinical experience, most likely, maybe even under if you've had volunteer experience or something like that. These bullet points are going to show a good demonstration of the skills that you have and some of the tasks that you did. Some people try to just list like basic tasks, but really this is a good, as Daphne would say, it's good real estate to showcase some of the skills that you have and put the reason why you're good at those skills, if that makes sense. So we'll go through these a little bit. You always want to start your bullet point with a verb, an action verb. For me, if it's a current position, I always use a present tense verb. So assisting or assists or manages or creates. So present tense. If it's a position that you're no longer in, if it's in the past, then use past tense. Assisted, supervised. Some people like to do consistency throughout where they're all past tense, and that's fine too. It's just my personal preference, so you can try to choose yours. I think it goes back to what Daphne says, just be consistent. And for me, the consistency of using the two different tenses is that you're still in that position, you're still doing those things, as where the past, you did those things in the past. So that's still okay. That still counts as consistency. But just, you kind of choose what works best for you in those. And those action verbs typically represent the skills that you have. So coordinated, managed, supervised, whatever it may be, those are skills. And so you want to come up with some strong skills. So there's an example on here. Let me click through real quick. Okay, awesome. So on these examples down here, I'm just going to read the first one to you real quick. So processed 80 to 100 transactions on a POS cash register daily, reconciled money at the end of the day to ensure the correct amount. So this is a good example. A lot of times for this type of example, so some of you may have some customer service or cashiering experience, but a lot of people will just put, handled transactions or handled, I can't think, handled cash transactions or checked out customers or something like that.
Counted money at the end of the day.
Counted money, exactly. So this is a much better idea of the skills that you have to do that specific task. So what action did you take? What are the ways that you applied those skills? How did you perform the task? What tools and what software, what programs did you use? What outcome did you have? What was the success of that? What did you achieve doing that? So in this example, 80 to 100 is the quantitative, I don't know. Quantitative, thank you. The quantitative representation of that action. The POS cash register is the tool that they used. They were able to reconcile the money, not just count money. And then at the end of the day, they made sure that there was a correct amount. So that was the outcome, that was the achievement, that there was the correct amount. So I know you'll kind of have to think about how this relates to your experience and kind of translate that a little bit, but that's a great example to use. The other example, just real quick, designed client database using Microsoft Access, doubled speed of information retrieval. So they designed, so that's a skill that they have. They designed a client database. Microsoft Access was the tool and the program that they used. And what was the result of that task that they did? They were able to double the speed of information retrieval. So it shows a success that they had. So it's not just basic tasks that you did. It's not just caring for patients. It's not just drawing blood, but how did you do it? What instruments did you use? What did you do? How did you do it better than your classmate? Maybe you can talk about some of like the personality traits that you had. Maybe like, you didn't just draw blood, but you cared for the patient. You listened to the patient while you were drawing blood or something like that. So you can think about what did you do to make that task better than your neighbor.
Yeah, these are good examples. And it just gives depth. This is a place too where, maybe you didn't realize you did all that. Maybe you're drawing blood on 120 clients a day, patients a day, or whatever. So, kind of some of that where you're highlighting some of those skills. But this is also a place where don't exaggerate, don't make stuff up, don't turn a task into something that it wasn't. We use this example like the point of sale cash register because a lot of people have that experience and they balanced out the day and they go, oh, I just counted the money. Well, actually, you are reconciling transactions and coming up with a balance and making sure that it was, all. I mean, there is more to that. And so, I mean, that's one reason why we use this example, because it's a really easy example. We see a lot of people not giving credence to the depth of what they're doing, right? Because you just do it. You did it a whole bunch of times. And so you kind of minimize that. But you also don't want to turn something into what it isn't. Like, don't make a really simple, maybe it is a menial task into, like you ran the company. So just be careful, be honest, but provide in-depth examples where you can when it benefits.
I would say, to add to that, also, if you're good at, let's say you work with a number of children, and a lot of children are very, unnerved, and you're very good at calming them, you make sure you want to add that as well.
That's a great example. Yeah. Or you don't hurt when you draw blood. That's important.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Shannon.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so we're going to move on to other sections on your resume. So like we mentioned earlier, the resume there's not a one-size-fits-all format or layout or different sections. So all of your resumes are going to look different from each other's, and that's okay. We talked about the professional summary, we talked about education, your work experience. Those are kind of the basic things that you want to have, but you can add other sections on there too. So on this example, if you speak multiple languages, you might want to have your own section for languages and talk about the languages that you have, because that helps set you apart from some of your classmates. Some people also use clinical experience as its own section, which I think is great, especially if you don't have a lot of work experience. I know someone mentioned earlier they had been a stay-at-home mom, so your clinical experience can represent your work experience. You just have to make sure that you identify it as clinical experience, but it can help you fill up some of that page to make it look a little bit more robust. Sorry, I'm having to move. I got videos all over my thing, so I'm having to move them around, so bear with me. I know this looks kind of weird.
Since you mentioned languages, Shannon, I wanted to just touch base with this.
Sure.
If you speak multiple languages, yay, that's fantastic. Good for you. I'm jealous. I wish I did. But if you just put English, Spanish, that implication there is that you are completely fluid in reading, writing, and speaking. If you aren't, maybe you aren't fluid in the written, but you are in the speaking. You need to identify what those are. And it's probably, if you speak multiple languages, it's different for different languages. That's great. Just be clear on what your skill and fluency level is in those different languages.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So other examples of different sections, you can have professional association. We mentioned this earlier under education. So if you're in like a nursing association, you can either have its own section or you can put it under education. Volunteer experience. If you have relevant, related volunteer experience, you can have that as its own section, especially if you need to fill up to get to that full one page. That's a great section to add. Volunteer experience, it's work experience basically, but it's not paid. So you're still learning valuable skills. You're developing some of those skills that, you could be using on a job. So you can have that in its own section as well. Special projects, activities, awards.
Wait, Shannon.
Sorry, go ahead. Sure.
Shannon, I want to speak to volunteer experience just because I think it's important for people to think about their volunteer experience, and how they present it, and if they present it. So a lot of people have volunteer experience that might be based in a certain like maybe it's with a religious affiliation. That's fantastic, and you're not supposed to be discriminated against for that. But keep in mind they don't know you, and so and maybe you don't want to work for someone who has different beliefs anyway. I don't know, but you just need to be aware of what that experience is, and if that's something that you want to put on there or not, or how you present it, you know, different things like that. I just want you to keep in mind, and it's all different kinds of things. So, you know, just think about that information. And again, you're wanting to hit the largest audience most of the time, and so just keep that in mind. It's kind of touchy subject to even talk about, but I think it's important that you think about, you know, what you're putting on there.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
We do have another question.
Okay.
From Brandy. It says, would you omit work experience if you create a clinical experience section if you do not have work experience in the healthcare field?
I would say yes. Like if you don't have any work experience to put in, then you don't even need that section, and just clinical experience is fine. So, you know, maybe it's your certifications, licensures, education, clinical experience, and moving on to something else. I would say yes.
I would say it depends. I definitely see Daphne's point. You know, if you don't have that work experience, then yes, you know, you can put the clinical experience in place of that. But if you do have work experience and it's just not related, you know, that's kind of, it really just depends on your situation. You know, sometimes employers like to see that you have work experience, even if it is unrelated, just because it shows that you've been hired, you've been in a professional environment. So I don't know. I think it would depend on your situation. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
I see
hard
what
to
you're
say.
saying. I agree with that. That's a good point.
And,
Yeah.
and another thing to add to it, it also depends on some of your work experience. Recently, I worked with someone who, at their previous job, while it was unrelated, they achieved a lot of awards at their last job. So they wanted to have a place to showcase the awards that they received. So I think that could help as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you promotions, and even if it's something completely different, that says a lot about you. So yeah, that's a good point.
And also if the work experience is unrelated, but maybe some of your tasks could be related. So like maybe, just as an example, maybe you were in customer service. Well, a big part of healthcare is customer service or patient service. And so you could kind of use that as transferable skills to add to your resume. So,
Absolutely.
you know, you might not want to omit, oh gosh, I cannot talk today. Sorry, guys. You might not want to omit that if, you know, if it could help you and show those transferable skills, especially if it was a recent job.
Yeah. That's all really good points. So Brandy, it would really depend on what that other work experience was and how you could tie it in. And it just speaks to just how personalized they all are and how best to represent you. Good question.
Okay, so she's saying, yeah, convenience store.
Well, the question above it is, if one has held 3 jobs simultaneously, contracting, is it confusing to list all, even if they're relevant? So it sounds like they may have had 3 jobs around the same time.
Yeah, I don't think that's confusing. I think you just put your dates. If they ended, you want to go by the end dates. So if you had 3 contracts, and maybe you're still in one, and then, you know, so list it in the one you're still in, and then go by end dates. And it's really common to see overlapping work dates on a resume. So no, I don't think that's confusing, and I think that really is a nice selling point. You know, it shows the ability to manage multiple tasks, and that, you know, you're kind of a go-getter and you're really making things happen. So I think there's a lot of really good things that come from that. But I would just start with, in the way that you list them, in that reverse chronological, making sure that you start with the one that you're still in or the last one that you left and work down that way. And then back to Brandy in regards to that experience that you had previously, and it was a convenience store. That's that customer service, patient care kind of thing that Shannon was talking about. There's probably some relevant experience there. And then also, like, if you're at a place for a long time, that's good information. That shows commitment, that shows longevity. One of the hardest things for employers is if I'm having to hire people over and over and over and over and over again, like people just don't stick with jobs like they used to. So if you worked at a place and you were there for a long time, that's really relevant information. Maybe it's not necessarily a transferable skill, but it is a good selling point and a good marketing tool for you. So, Brandy, a lot of that just really depends on what that position looked like. You know, were you there by yourself? Did you manage the whole store? Did you serve in any kind of management capacity? Or maybe, which is common in convenience stores, you were doing management, but you didn't get the title or the pay. And so some of those things. So a lot of that is just a conversation on how best to represent and emphasize that information. It's really personalized. So that it's hard without knowing more information, Brandy. And I hope that was helpful. And it looks like from Mr. Bigsby, in normal years, because you get 600 to 700 hours of clinical time, he encourages listing clinical hours. That is a lot of time in a clinical setting, and sometimes you get to do stuff. Absolutely right. I mean, that clinical experience is extremely important, and with those hours. And yeah, with this current situation, I don't know what clinicals have looked like for y'all. So it might be worth having a conversation on how to present that and house that information. But clinical experience is very important. Also, I hope that in clinical experiences, you are making connections and creating relationships with people who could be good references. And we'll talk about that later. But those clinical supervisors, or even people who you are subordinate to in your clinical experience, are really great references because they see your work and it's recent and relevant. So that's a really good thing. But absolutely, where you did those sites and how much time you spent there, and then highlighting any interesting or cool things that you got to do.
Here's another question. It says, what if you are semi-retired and your work experience is several years in the past and there is a year or more of no employment?
That again is pretty kind of personalized and would best be served by a conversation. But it's okay to have. Yeah, it just depends on what that. I would need some more details, but it's okay to have gaps in employment. You just need to be able to discuss them and talk about them. So what's more important is that your entire resume is compelling enough to get them to bring you in, that then you can have that conversation about it. But, you know, in today's time, lots of people, a ton of people who work really, really hard and then they take 6 months off. You know, I wish I could figure that out. But, you know, I mean, so it's not like it used to where everybody had this job and they stayed this. People just don't live life that way. And so gaps in employment aren't as big of a deal as they used to be. You just need to be able to have those conversations and explain those. And the way that you develop your resume needs to have those things in mind, and the best way to represent it. There's even a way to put on your resume that you are semi-retired, whether it's in your professional summary or somewhere in that work experience thing or whatever, a creative way to identify that so that it's pretty clear that, hey, I'm kind of working maybe just because I want to, or, I'm just not quite ready to retire or whatever that is. So there's lots of flexibility in that. But I mean, I wouldn't at all be worried about it. If you had a year or more of no employment, I wouldn't be worried about that. What about Shannon or Mark?
I would say the same thing. I wouldn't worry too much about it, especially since you're in school now. You're about, I think y'all are close to graduation, if I remember him saying that correctly. But you have more recent experience than that work experience, and that recent experience is your school. So I think that kind of helps, maybe not necessarily fill the gap, but it shows that you've been working on something, more recently. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Right, and I know I have a friend who I went to high school with who went through was a nurse, has actually retired from the nursing field, and then went back to school and got some additional training, and now she's like a traveling nurse. So she pretty much works the summer, she takes the winters off, and I haven't seen her resume. I don't know how that's reflected. That's what she does. She works in the summertime, then she takes the winters off, and that, because she lives up north and she doesn't come out a lot. But
she hibernates in the winter. That is brilliant. She is brilliant. I love it.
So yeah, she's retired. She's already retired, and she uses, and I think a lot of times she uses the wintertime also to take courses online or take courses that don't require her to come out as much.
I love it. She's smart. Okay, so I hope that answered your question, Randolph. Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you all for your questions. Keep them coming. That's what we're here for, and we want this to be a conversation with you guys. So if you have anything, please just shoot it in the chat and we'll get to it. We talked about this other section already, languages. If you have any publications that are relevant, you can add those in there. Special projects, activities, awards. You can kind of choose what you think is the most relevant information and section to put down here. So hopefully we give you some good ideas for those. But if you have any questions about your particular experience, just reach out to us and we can help you with that. We are going to move on. So other sections you can use, we kind of talked about this. I'm going to skip through it. Actually, let me go back real quick. At the top of our example on this previous resume, let me go back just a couple so I can show you. We did have a section for the certifications and licensure. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. You can have this as its own section, or you can put it under your education. For you guys, since a lot of you get a lot of different certifications, like the basic life support, IV, whatever else that may be, since y'all get a lot of different certifications, I personally would probably move it into its own section, just to kind of help it stand out a little bit from your degree and your education. But that's completely up to you, whatever you think is relevant. I have also seen some other students that have like a technical skills section. This is good too, if you want to put like phlebotomy or whatever. I don't know much about nursing, as you can probably tell, so bear with me. But those specific technical skills that y'all gain in your program, you can have a section for that. I will say though, since you're all graduating from the same program, you probably all are starting with those skills. So as Daphne mentioned earlier, it might be better to focus on a skill section that's more of those, what we call soft skills. So like, the ability to problem solve, think independently, work as a team, things like that aren't those technical skills. But you can kind of play and see what message your resume is getting across and what you would benefit more from. If you want to focus more on those technical skills, then great. If that works for you, then great. But you might want to consider adding in some of those soft skills in there as well.
So I'm gonna jump in here too. So specifically for careers where you have to have a license or certification to hold a position, I think that it is good to have that in that top 1/3 of the resume, because it's kind of like if you don't have that, then what's the point of moving forward, right? So I do think that's a really good place. But if you have the room for it, I think that technical skills or skills and abilities or whatever to be able to highlight. Of course, hopefully those came into your professional summary, but that's a really good, again, this is a marketing tool, marketing yourself. So anywhere that you can put in some of those traits and abilities, those characteristics that make you stand out, that personalizes it. It gives me a better sense of who you are, and it typically is more marketable. We talked about kind of like that baseline. This is what everybody has, it comes out of this program or any other program knowing. And so what's the next step? And so anytime that you can infuse those, then I think that that's a benefit. It's just marketing yourself better. But again, that also depends on what else are you bringing to the table? How much does that add? What does it look like? How many pages are we at? You know, all that kind of stuff. So you really kind of have to finesse that to paint that best picture of yourself. I also see that we have a couple of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over there because I see them rolling up. Is there a preference on formatting and naming a file for your resume cover letter? So that is a really good question, because those come across on that email with the file name that you put on there. And so, you know, that needs to be professional as well. And so, you know, if you saved it as, you know, resume number 23 to this place, they're like, holy cow, you know. So, you know, LVN resume, home health, LVN resume, nursing home, LVN resume, critical care, you know, whatever those things happen to be, that's a really good way to save it, because they are going to see that on the other side. So do think about what that looks like. That's a good question. And I think that's what you meant. If you meant something different, shoot us another one and we'll fix that. Should you include expiration on certifications? Yes. Yes, you should. And actually the expiration, the expired, include expired certifications.
Right.
Oh, so they're past. That's a really good question. I think it depends, because I've done that on mine as an LP, even like in organizations that I was a part of, and maybe I'm not anymore. I've included those. I think it's pretty personal. Shannon, Mark, what do y'all think?
Go ahead, Shannon.
Sorry, there's a delay on mine, so I don't mean to keep talking over you. I was just going to say, I agree. I think it depends on your specific situation. If it's a relevant certification, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence. You know, I think it could help you to have that on there to show that you've had that training, especially if it was still like somewhat recent, if it like recently expired. You also don't want it to come across like you do have that certification, and then you don't want it to come across that it looks like you're lying, that it's current. So I would just be really, really careful how you put that on there. You know, maybe instead of putting the expired certification on there, maybe you can add somewhere, like whether it's your education or work experience or something, some of those skills that you have from that expired certification, rather than actually putting that you have the certification. But it completely depends. I could argue both sides.
And I was just going to add, if you've had a certification in the past and you're in the process of renewing it, it may be something that you may include there or on your cover letter.
For sure, yeah. If you plan on renewing it, then absolutely that wouldn't be a problem at all. I think it's just if it's expired and you have no intention of renewing it, that might be just a little bit of a line that you have to be careful not to cross, because you don't want it to come across that you're lying or exaggerating or something like that.
Yeah, so Brittany, all that to say, it depends. We'd probably need to know what it was or whatever. So maybe one of us, maybe Mark, an email with that specific, and we can look at that more directly to give you the best advice in that. Okay. So we're talking about tips and tricks. Tailor your resume to the position you're applying for. We've already talked about that a little bit. You will probably have an area that you want to work in, but especially in this climate, you'll take other stuff. So, you know, those resumes might just be a little, you know, a bit different for those different areas. As I said before, I think the bones are the same, but then, you know, Shannon kind of thinks differently. They might look very different. And maybe that's a place to kind of play and see what that looks like. Maybe they're very different. You see what works best and what gets the most impact and results. So that's kind of interesting. And do, as the question, is that Camilla? I love that. Camilla asked about naming those. Make sure that you're naming those in a professional manner as well. Don't lie. Don't exaggerate. You're fabulous enough. You don't need to do that. Focus on your accomplishments and your current skills. We talked about that. Just even in that passive language, being having a growth mindset, of the forthcoming mentality. Short text and bullets. People are not going to read long paragraphs within the body of your resume. It needs to pop out. What can I see? Pay attention to what is popping out. Do not put your picture on your resume. I'm sure you are beautiful or handsome and fantastic, but there is no need for a picture unless it is like your modeling portfolio. Do not put a picture, your picture, or any picture on your resume. Review. Have somebody else look it over. Always have somebody else look it over, because what you mean to say and think you're saying, you just need to make sure that that's what is being received. And I don't know y'all, but I will top something out and I know exactly, and then you go back and, you know, things are spelled wrong and it was wrong because that's just what we do. And so just have someone else review it, and always send it to yourself and someone else in the format, Word and PDF, to see what it looks like on the other side. And again, there's really no excuse for misspelled words. I mean, your computer even's going to tell you if it's misspelled. Sometimes they get it wrong, but you know, so make sure that you just, all that stuff is just really clean and easy. And then upload your resume into LinkedIn is just a really good passive job search activity to, you know, get some more traction. All right, what's next? Okay, so here we're talking about saving those. So save it in an easy to recognize. It's good to have your name, John Smith resume, as you know, something that is linked to that email or in their database or whatever. Word doc and PDF. So if you're uploading it into some sort of web-based platform, it's probably going to require a PDF. My suggestion is when you email, if the option is to just email it, that you email it in a PDF and a Word, and then they can open whichever works best for you. And I base that on this. In professional communities, if I'm sending a report to anybody, you know, superior to me, standard protocol is that I send that in a Word document and a PDF, always. Whether it's internal, whether I'm sending it to the state, whether I'm sending it to the federal government, whether I'm sending it to another college or an association of community colleges or whatever, like that is standard protocol. You send both of those documents. So if that's professional protocol just across the board, then it makes sense that that would be the professional protocol for this as well. And it's just easier. Just make it, they can open whichever one that they want. If you're emailing your resume, in that subject line, job title and job number or code. So typically you've seen this job somewhere, it's posted under this number. If you find it off somewhere on a site, it's typically going to have a number for their tracking purposes. That's what's in your subject line. Also, do we talk about this later about emailing those? when you email it, that is a professional communication. Don't attach your resume and put here you go and put your first name. They're never going to open it. I wouldn't open it. There needs to be a conversation or an introduction. You know, hello, if you know the person or not, whatever. But please see attached my resume for the position of, and some sort of professional engagement with them. We see a lot of emails that aren't communication. You need to present this professionally. Intro, body, it doesn't have to be long. It can be one sentence, that's fine. And then a closing. Thank you for your time, respectfully, sincerely, whatever that is. And then your name. And then I always put my contact information right there. Obviously, they have your email because you're emailing it, so it's right there, but your phone number, and you can put your email again if you want to make it easy to get back to you. You know, I just include that anytime that I think they might want it, to make it easy to get in touch with me, because all of this is in order to get an interview, to get some face time with this prospective employer.
And we are going to go through and talk about cover letters in just a little bit. And what I usually do if I'm sending out a resume somewhere, I'll put my cover letter as my email. And so we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, that's true. I've done that as well. So, and then online job applications, if you're copying and pasting your resume, man, those just typically are really messy, but it just is what it is. You may want to alter your format in order for it to copy and paste appropriately. So also, bullets don't typically work when you have to copy and paste your resume into an application. So dashes or asterisks maybe, that's iffy, but Shannon's got semicolons here, something like that. They just typically don't transfer as well in some of those platforms. What else do y'all have to say about this stuff?
I would just say for this specific point, you don't necessarily have to have a resume with no bullets. That's not what we're saying. It's just some online job applications will have you copy and paste it instead of upload it. And so that's when you just have to be careful that, you know, those bullet points, if you copy and paste it into that platform, that it might not copy over. So you might have to just be careful and change it in that box that you copied it into or pasted it into. So we're not saying that you can't use bullets in your actual resume, and I hope you do use bullet points actually, but just be careful if you have to copy and paste it.
And I was just going to add to that, yeah, but it always helps to go in there, and sometimes you may have to delete it out and put it back in physically. Any punctuation other than like the periods.
Okay, that's good. All right, so now let's look at some examples. So on the screen, the one on the left, I think is probably the one that we've been looking at as a good example. And then the one on the right is not so much a good example. Just before you even get into the content of which one looks like they have more experience and is more professional, and what jumps out. So on the one on the right, all I really see are the headings, but I get more into kind of the meat of it with the one on the left. So the one on the right, see, it's got the full address. Now they know where you live. Also, this is, you don't need to put phone and then the phone number, or email and then the email. We kind of all know what those are. So you don't want to use words just to be using them. Everything needs to be purposeful. So, first, and with that example, I mean, that's just obvious. And then you don't even need to put cell phone or home phone or anything like that. Like just provide a number where they can get in touch with you and they can leave a message, and you can get back to them. So that's really all that matters. They don't need to know the source of that phone number. And then you don't need to title your email. This one again has the objective, and then this is typically what an objective said, and you can see kind of how that's just, I mean, there's a huge difference in that, in your professional summary and your objective. This one on the right highlights the institution, and then that person's actual degree. Their marketing part is really pretty buried. It also says LVN. You need to, like it was mentioned, you need to spell those out. And then you don't even need your start date on your program on anything. That's less important for your program because you go through as a cohort, and so it's pretty structured. But like just people who are going to school, you don't have to put a start date on that, unless you're listing something that you haven't completed. And I just kind of muddied that water, so I'm sorry about that. But just your expected graduation or your graduation is the most important there. The experience, I mean, it's all, you can just see, it's all pretty sketchy. And I assume most people can see their screen, but it's just really limited. It's not interesting, and it doesn't give any depth. To say that you're hardworking without giving some example is not super relevant. It doesn't even say under skills, it says communication. What does that even mean? Like, I can communicate. Do I communicate well? How do I communicate well? What are my strengths in that? So what else do y'all have to say about these two examples, Mark and Shannon?
I was going to say the one really doesn't capture anyone's attention either.
Yeah, it's really elementary. You know, it lacks in professional presentation.
So for these two examples, I mean, so they're both almost identical content as far as like the experience and education go, but as you can see, they're completely different in the way that the employer would view it. And I think that's kind of the point we wanted to make, is that, you know, you really need to go in depth on what those different skills are and how you demonstrated those, and what that looks like, as opposed to just short, quick bullet points with no depth at all. And so that's why I really wanted to show these two, because, you know, it's the same person with two different resumes. You know, they have the same background, the same education, the same experience, but it's, you know, they're just very, very different in the way that they're portrayed. So I hope that helps give you all a little bit of a visual.
And having the mentality of putting yourself in the prospective employer's shoes, you know, which one is the professional that you would be interested in speaking with, you know? So, I mean, it just kind of right up front, it gives a different feel about who's behind this resume. Also noticed, and I want to point out, under skills, it says computer skills. Again, be purposeful. What does that even mean? And that's also a place for like ATS, because they may be requesting very specific skills, you know, maybe Google Suite or Microsoft Work Suite or something like that, or they meant specifically Excel or specifically Google Docs or whatever. So those are things that ATS would filter out for, and computer skills is not going to make that through that system. So, so just an example of one that could use some improvements.
You ready to move on?
I think we're getting pretty close to the end of our resume section. Is that right, Shannon?
Yes.
Okay, so if y'all got questions about resumes, go ahead and get those in the chat now. Anything that you have questions about on resumes, let's field those questions if you have them.
And I kind of just wanted to point out, we couldn't really see it before, but on this examples, my words, I'm sorry. On this example, you can really see the difference in how they broke out clinical experience versus their work experience versus their education. So that's a good representation of, you can see what exactly is the clinical experience, what exactly is paid work experience. So hopefully that kind of helps you visualize that a little bit more too. And they, on this example, they treated that just like a job, just like the work experience. So there's still the bullet points under there, tasks that you worked on. There's that very first bullet point, selected by supervisor to perform catheter insertion and peg tube feeding on 2 patients. So that's an accomplishment that person had. They were selected by their supervisor. So if you have any examples like that, that's a great thing to put on your resume. You know, if you were selected by your supervisor, then you must be doing something right. That's an accomplishment that you've had. So you can think of like little things like that. It doesn't have to be all specific tasks that you did. That's a great example.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any more resume questions. So let's move into your references. First and foremost, references don't go on your resume. You can put references available upon request, but that's not even necessary. They do need to right now go ahead and be collecting information for references, and at a minimum you need 3 professional references. And just know, kind of moving forward, that's just something that you always need to be cultivating and have on hand. References available upon request. The reason it's not necessary is because it's just expected. Resumes will go on a different sheet, a different page, and that can be like the next page after your resume. It's just not something you submit until you're asked for. If you have an interview, or when you have an interview, you want to have that information handy. And so if we get to interviewing, which it doesn't look like we're going to, but it's likely at this point that a lot of those are online. You need to submit those to your contact at that organization prior to that online virtual interview. So, but the format you need to, I like to have, so you saw that resume, it had the name and then the email and the phone number and the city, state, and zip. I like to have that like a heading, and that almost creates like my professional letterhead. And then I have that same thing on my cover letter, my resume, and my references. And it's just really consistent, clean, and professional. That's my personal preference. It's what I do personally and professionally for myself. But it is important that there is some sort of consistency, across those. But you need to have your name, and your contact information, again, needs to be at the forefront and relevant. Easy to find. Oh, the vocabulary thing's spreading to me, Shannon. I'm losing my words.
It's Monday.
It is. Anyway, so just again, having that where it's easy to read, easy to find out how to contact you, and some consistency is good. On your references, you need to have permission to use anybody as a reference. You need to ask them, yes, and they need to be a good reference. So make sure that you have those conversations. A good place to get professional references, if you have prior work experience, any supervisor is a good professional reference. It doesn't matter if it was a different field or not. I lost my notes.
I'm gonna pull up the example.
Okay, but but you can use those relevant in this field references are also really good and important. And so you can use your instructors, professors, but you can't use 3 of them. So 1 is good. You could push that to 2 if you don't have anything else, but it's not really a great idea to have 3 professors. Again, there's some flexibility. It kind of depends on what your options are. But we talked previously about in clinical on clinical sites, those supervisors, anybody that works there, you are subordinate to anybody there because you are doing your clinicals. You're a student. I'm fixing to sneeze. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, y'all. But so anybody there, anybody that is your superior is a good reference. Your friends are not references. That's not considered a professional reference. Your parents are not considered a professional reference. So co-students are not considered professional references. So you need to be cultivating those things now, having those conversations, asking those people, anybody who that is willing to be a reference and is willing to write a letter for you. That's like, that could be a long letter, but if someone is willing to write a letter to speak to your skills and abilities and traits and sign their name to it, that's gold. So so keep that in mind if you can have that information. So on this sheet that's up, it's got the same heading, which I love. It says references. You could say professional references, whatever is your preference. You have their full name, you have their title, the company, an email, and a phone number. Because you've gotten their permission, you know what email and phone number they want to use because you asked them. Is it their work phone or is their personal phone? It doesn't matter. It's up to that reference. And same thing with their email. Lots of times that will be there, and it's probably better for their email if it is their professional email. But again, it is their preference because they're the one being the reference for you. So like I said, you need a minimum of 3 and probably no more than 5. But you need 3. And it's good if those are well-rounded. If you have one of your instructors and then a clinical site supervisor and an old boss, that's a beautiful trifecta there. So you know, those can be from different places. You provide those when asked, but if and when you get to an interview, have it handy. Have it handy in digital form, have it handy on paper. If it is a web-based interview, a virtual interview, then you need to have sent it ahead of time, or at least have it really easy to send it immediately. I like to send them ahead of time, but I kind of over prepare for some of those things. Let's see, provide your references with your resume so they can review before they get contacted. So so you can send your resume to those references. This is a really good idea. I've never done this before in my life, and it really never even occurred to me. And Shannon does this, and I think it's brilliant. That's a really good idea so that they know what they're speaking to. So you've gotten their permission, you've checked you've asked them what contact information, so the email that they provide you, just send them an email thanking them for being a reference, and send them your resume. That's really professional. That is really professional. And then again, they know what they are speaking to. And then if you, when you get an interview, or like now what's really popular is kind of these screening tools where you provide references and then they contact them before they really ever contact you, or you had a phone interview or something like that and they've asked for references they're going to contact. There's a lot of things that companies do now to kind of screen before they get into that interview process. So if you find out that they are going to be checking references, notify those people. And they will appreciate that. They'll be looking for it. Sometimes those go to junk mail or they just get passed up in somebody's mail. So you just want them to know to be looking for that. And I know I have several people in my life who use me as a reference. It's an honor to be asked to be a reference. Um, and so I enjoy that heads up. I appreciate that I can be looking for that and already going ahead and formulating my thoughts and stuff. So so that's just good information to share. And then we talked.
Okay, I will say we do have a question.
Okay.
The question is, so references has to be somebody that has more experience than you?
Yeah. Your reference needs to be a superior. So like I said, it's not going to be someone someone in your cohort. It's not going to be someone that is of your, a reference needs to speak to with authority to your skills and ability. And so just a same level colleague is not a good reference. Now, I say that if you don't have anything, then maybe that's who you use, but it's better to have that than nothing, but it's not the professional expectation. The professional expectation is that it is a superior. So it doesn't have to be your big boss. It can be anybody who, you know, has any sort of superior rank to you. But to just have another, don't have a friend. Don't have someone who's not in, if they're a friend and they're not even in the field, don't bother. But even someone that's in this cohort with you or whatever is, again, if you've got nothing, then okay. But yes, it needs to be someone who has more experience than you.
I have used, I wouldn't necessarily call them a peer. I have used somebody that was just about at my level, but I considered them to be a mentor. They had been in the field a long time. So even though we were kind of on the same level per se, I still looked up to them as a mentor, as almost a supervisor. So you could think of it in that kind of frame of mind too. You know, you don't want to, but if there's another LVN that has been doing that for a long time that you look up to and can kind of learn from, then that might be a good person to use. Or use people that know how you work and have worked with you on like a team setting. They can vouch for your work ethic, and just kind of like the way you operate as an employee. So hopefully that helps give you a little bit more of an idea too.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Mentors are good. People that you look up to are good. But, you know, yeah, that's good. Hopefully that helped, Alicia. So there's a question. So a previous position we worked for would be okay. Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. Okay, what's next?
Cover letters.
Okay, so we're moving on to cover letters. Any other questions on references? Y'all shoot those over so we can field them if we've got any more there. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about cover letters. Cover letters are valuable real estate. That is my favorite term. They are a place to market yourself. There are some people who don't do them. Some people who even say that they're, you know, falling out of vogue, and that's fine. Again, it is your personal preference, but my opinion is that it is a valuable marketing tool where you could really make a connection. And when I am a prospective employer, have one position and I'm reviewing 75 candidates, I am looking for one, ways to eliminate, and second, I'm looking for ways to connect, right? And that onus is on the job seeker to make that connection, to provide information and communication that draws that prospective employer in. So I think it's very important. It's just a great tool. You can use that personal professional summary from your resume kind of as your starting point. So you kind of pull that and just blow it out, and that can become your cover letter. But your cover letter is a formal professional communication. So it has, like old school, it has a heading and a subject line and a greeting and your paragraphs and a professional closing. Contact information is important. So it is a very formal professional letter. It does not have to be long, better if it's not long. But again, this is a place where everything needs to be purposeful. What do you want to say? Say it and tell them you said it, right? You remember that from like your English classes? Tell me what you're going to say it, and tell me what you said in a very short, concise, pointed narrative. Typically, there are only 3 paragraphs. You have, like I just said, that intro, your qualifications, kind of your sales pitch, like your, some people call it their elevator speech, somebody call it their 3-second commercial. I don't call it any of those things because I don't know, that just doesn't resonate with me. I just call it a personal narrative. What are selling points of yourself? What are those things you want to market about yourself? And then a very professional, respectful closing. So in that intro, so again, heading the company that you're applying for. Hopefully you did some research. So backing up, hopefully you saved the job description, the posting, so that you know what those keywords are that they're looking for. Hopefully you did some research about that company and you either have a contact name, maybe that was in the job description, that's unlikely in the job posting, but hopefully you've done some research and you can find that. And so you've got that heading, the company with their address and their phone number. Then you've got your information in there. You've got the date of your cover letter. And then there is typically, in our notes here, it says subject line, but oftentimes that is the capital R, capital E, colon, which means in reference to. And so RE, and then your job title, the job posting number, whatever goes right there. If it's just a subject line, then just the job title that you're applying for. Sometimes y'all applying for jobs like in these big companies that have smaller places in it. So there might be some identification of where that's at, just kind of depends on what it is. And then you'll have your greeting. Do not use dear sirs or madam. Don't do that. Don't say to whom it may concern. There's lots of different options. Shannon, one the other day that we really liked. What was it?
They said like dear company name, so like dear Baylor Scott and White or whatever.
Yeah. Typically, if you can, typically for your companies, you're going to name in the HR section. So use that name if nothing else. Because most of these documents are going to flow through the HR department. That's a name is better than a general thing. But if you do general, then the name of the company is good. Hiring, the hiring panel. I mean, there's different options that you can do there, but not to whom it may concern, and not, sirs and madam. I don't even know if people do that anymore, but I'm old, so. Okay.
I've used dear hiring manager before,
I like that.
just because it's directed directed to a person, even though you don't know their name, rather than to who it may concern, that kind of sounds like I don't know who I'm supposed to be talking to, you know, and so dear hiring managers, just like that's a person. So it's just a little bit more formal way to do that intro.
I agree. I like that. Okay, so then you're going to have your intro, which is just going to introduce the position that you're applying for, how you found out about it, and then your enthusiasm about that position. So it's more concrete information, what I'm applying for. Maybe you found it on Indeed. And again, I mentioned earlier, jobs that you find on Indeed or Glassdoor or another, even LinkedIn, although that's kind of less for this, what I'm talking about. But I always suggest that you go back to the website of the company and apply through there. And I'm speaking from experience of interviewing and hiring people. When I see, and it comes across and it tells me that they got it from Indeed, I automatically give that less preference than I do somebody who came through our, and the reason is because, I mean, a lot of people go on Indeed and they just apply for whatever, and lots of times those just don't pan out. Like they don't pan out. Like there's people don't call you back, or their qualifications don't fit, or something like that. I mean, those websites, those job platforms are fantastic. That's great to have all that information housed in one place when you utilize it correctly and professionally. But speaking from someone who has received a bunch of resumes, applications, and that being one of the portals that they come through, it made a difference to me if it came through our website or if it came through a job bank. So keep that in mind. I always recommend people go. So if you see something and it is Baylor Scott and White on Indeed, and it's easy to go to Baylor Scott and White. Their job section is easy to find. Most medical healthcare places, all that's really easy to find and connect with. So that would be my advice there. That was a sidebar. I apologize. I have go off on tangents if y'all couldn't tell. Okay, so how you found out about it. So I saw on your website, or, you know, LinkedIn made a connection between me and this position, you know, something like that. Because LinkedIn has algorithms that connect you with stuff. So hopefully you know that too. And then enthusiasm about applying for, and maybe just a little bit about why you're a good fit. But really that second paragraph is going to be those qualifications, those things we've been talking about of what make you unique, what areas set you apart, what are your giftings that you can share in that place. It still doesn't need to be long. I mean, 3 sentences, maybe 4. It needs to be very purposeful and succinct. They're not going to spend a lot of time on it. So really a lot of this is getting their attention so that they'll spend time on it later, right? And then your closing and your wrap up, thanking them for their time, thanking them for considering you, forecasting that you look forward to hearing back from them. This isn't a place to ask about, you know, when you might hear back from them. This isn't a place to say I'm available on Tuesdays and Thursdays only. None of that. Again, thinking about large audience and some things are better left, you know, for later.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, you know, since, well, I don't know how y'all are doing it because of COVID right now, but typically with your clinicals, from my understanding, you rotate, you know, different departments or different organizations or things like that. If you're applying to a job that you've done clinical hours at, you might want to add that as a focus in your cover letter as well, because you already have a connection with that place. So that's just something to keep in mind. Or if you, like, let's say I had a student I worked with a few weeks ago that was a medical assistant at this facility, and then she ended up going on to get her LVN, and she was applying as an LVN to that same facility that she worked at before. So put that in your cover letter, because that's a good point for you. You know, since you already know the organization, you've already been there, you've already had experience there, even if it was clinical and not paid, that's still valuable for them. So I would always add that to your cover letter if that's a scenario that works for you.
That's really good advice. Yeah. Any connections that you can make there is great. If you're specifically referred by someone inside, put that in your cover letter. You know, Susie Q in radiology shared with me this position or referred me to this position or, you know, whatever. Oh, you know, assuming they're a good employee. Okay. So on your closing, so that's your third paragraph, thanking them, looking towards the future. And then in your closing, I always use respectfully. Shannon always uses sincerely. Mark, what do you always use?
Usually respectfully.
You're outnumbered. Again, it's personal preference. I don't like sincerely. To me, that feels too casual. And just thinking that this is a professional document. But I mean, you know, we hired Shannon, so surely it was okay, right?
And I don't like respectfully, so it's really personal preference.
Yeah, for sure.
I think
yeah, sometimes respectfully.
Right. I would say I use sincerely when I'm writing to someone I know specifically. But if it's not someone I don't know, then I use respectfully.
And Nick says he uses best regards. So that's good too. So it just needs to be a professional closing. So, and then I always, you know, you put your name. And then in this technical world, it's a little different about, you know, space for signing and that sort of stuff. But if you can get a signature on there, that's great. And I always like to then again put my contact information at the end, because my hope is that I engage them enough with this letter. They read all the way through it. And then now they want to call me, right? And so I make sure, or email me. So I make sure that I just spoon feed and make it as easy as possible for the prospective employer. So I always put my contact information at the signature line, but again, that is your personal preference. And then Shannon said kind regards. That's a good one too. And again, very important, check your spelling, your grammar, your punctuation. It is not uncommon for things to get eliminated because of spelling or grammar problems. Like they'll just toss that out. So, and check your punctuation, and also again have somebody read it. And then I also see over here we have a question from Cheyenne. It says, do we use our title as well? For example, do you sign it Cheyenne Brown LVN? I love that. I love that. I think that's very professional. You have worked hard to earn your credentials and use them. Yeah, I like it. Okay, move on. Okay, Shannon, I'm going to let you take this part, please, ma'am.
Sure. All right. Sorry, I got to move boxes out of the way. Okay. So tips for effectiveness on your cover letter. Daphne mentioned earlier that you really want to use your cover letter to connect with employers. And that's going to be key on having a successful cover letter for you and having that, you know, bigger chance to get your foot in the door for an interview. So one way to do that is research the company, know who they are, what their business is, what their mission is, maybe what some of their values are. And you can speak to some of those in your cover letter too. So like, just as an example, let's say they value patient care or individualized patient care. Well, maybe that's something that you value as well. So you can speak to that in your cover letter. Like, I noticed that your company values individualized patient care, and I would love to be a part of that team to contribute to that value or whatever it may be. So I know that's not a super great example at the top of my head, but that can kind of give you an idea, because that's it puts in their mind that you know that organization, that you know that you'll fit well in there. And so that kind of makes them think like, okay, yeah, they would be a good fit for this culture, for this work environment. So that's what I like to do in mine, is pull something specific about that company that I like or that I admire, or that we have like a shared sort of value or something like that, and make sure that that is probably in that first paragraph. So with that, you would probably want to write a different cover letter for each position that you're applying to. What I usually do is kind of have just like a basic cover letter with my information, and change just pieces of it depending on who I'm applying to. So maybe you change the job title, you change the name of the company, maybe you change that connection piece, whether it's their mission or values or whatever, something that you like about the company. So that cover letter fits specifically that company and that position that you're applying to. Hopefully that makes sense for you guys.
I'm going to add one thing.
Sure.
Also, it kind of helps is if you like, let's say you found the position on Indeed, you go to the website and you actually found the position on the website, and you find out on the website that it's for a position in like the ICU unit, or if it's in the emergency room, you can also kind of specifically put down the department too. So that kind of helps distinguish you from someone who just found a position on Indeed.
Absolutely. Okay. And so as we talked about earlier, your resume really focuses on your technical skills that you have, that shows that you meet the qualifications for the job. And it starts to get into like a little bit of personality and who you are as an employee and what you bring to the table. But your cover letter is going to do more of that for you. I like what Daphne said. It's really your personal narrative. So it tells your story. It gives a little bit more insight to your personality traits and what would make you a good employee for that company. So think about it from that perspective too. In your cover letter, be confident and direct, but not arrogant or timid. So you want to come across as strong and purposeful. I think that means that piece is important. So be confident, be purposeful. Don't be scared and shy. Talk about your skills and what you're bringing to the table, because at the end of the day, if you're not confident with your skills and yourself, how are they going to be confident in you? You really need to come across like, yes, I have these skills. Yes, I can do this job. And here's X, Y, and Z, why I can do that job. And yeah, last bullet point, have a purpose behind what you're saying. Make sure it's relevant not only to the position, but to that company. Make sure what you're saying fits what they're looking for.
Yeah, I would also just remind people that people don't hire, or people hire people they like. And so anytime you can use this narrative to connect with other people, to not really ingratiate, but just to share those personal things and try to make that connection, then that's going to be to your benefit. You want them to have an emotional connection, right? So so utilize that as best you can in this place.
All right. So we're going to move into portfolios, and I'll just start. So a lot of people hear the word portfolio, and I know I did at first, but they think of kind of like an art student, where you have a portfolio of all of your artwork and designs that you've done. Well, just about anybody can use a portfolio. And the basic portfolio is going to be your cover letter, your resume, and your references. So you already have one started once you have those 3 documents. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can emphasize that and and really use a portfolio to your advantage. So I mentioned the basic portfolio: resume, cover letter, and references. And we'll talk a little bit more about this too, but I'm going to go ahead and skip there now. But you can have a physical portfolio and you can have a digital portfolio. So if you have a digital one, it's going to be your digital documents all kind of in one folder. You can even have it uploaded on a website or something. I've seen some people have like their own website with their resume and cover letter on different pages. But you might want to also consider having it printed. So have a printed copy of your resume, your cover letter, your references, and then these other documents that we're going to talk about. So letters of recommendation.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So in talking about your portfolio, it is best to have both a digital and a hard copy of that. Of course, you can print it off, at will, but I would also have it on like a thumb drive as well, save somewhere on some sort of hard drive or cloud or something like that. I really like the idea of having a website, but those, typically do cost money, but you can do those things also in your LinkedIn. But go ahead and start thinking now about collecting things for your portfolio. The professional portfolio is really a professional representation of your professional career. And so I would say, one, if you ever get any kind of kudos or accolades, if you're given any kind of awards or special recognition, you need to have a place that you house that stuff. I even tell people to save really good emails. You can save them as a PDF and save it in there, because even that helps you build your language and how you market yourself when a superior says something about the work that you've done. Then that becomes qualitative data for you to put in your documentation. So you have a source to back it up. And so that's always really good stuff. So just be thinking now, get a thumb drive, create a file, something where you're saving that stuff. And so you're just kind of building that professional data. And so emails, any accolades, certifications, documentation, review, like a 90-day review or a 6-month review or something, and it's really good, save that sucker. And then use that for building the way that you communicate yourself professionally. And I really like people to start doing that really early on. Maybe you got some of those things as a student or in your clinical experience or whatever. Kind of go back, find it, pull it together. And it's just a really good thing to do. It's also like, you have a bad day, go read really great things people said about you to lift your spirits. So it serves two purposes. So anyway, that's really what your portfolio is. It is it's a place where you house your professional documentation. So my portfolio includes, and here's some things that you should include in there, but typically they always start with your cover letter, your resume, and your references. Any letters of recommendation that anybody has agreed to write for you. But like for me, I've got a copy of I don't always include my bachelor's because I have a master's degree, but sometimes I put copies of both of those. I have my licensures, like my license to practice, because I'm an LPC, and so I include that in there, the current one that is not expired. And then other subsequent certifications that you have. So anything that supports your those professional letters behind your name or whatever, you need to have the documentation that supports that. And then but it can also be just things that people have said and documentations and things like that. So also, it's a good idea to save in this digital format your transcripts. Lots of times places are going to want those even years from now. And so save that somewhere, an official transcript you can have access to. Go ahead, Shannon. Sorry, tangent.
No, that's great. Just while we're on transcripts, a lot of times if they're asking for a copy of transcripts, they'll take the unofficial transcript as opposed to the official. Sometimes they'll specify if they want the official transcript, but just so you're aware, you can have an unofficial transcript copy.
And lots of times if they're asking for the official, they're going to want that from the institution sent
Right.
directly to them. And so that's fine if it's an unofficial, but you need to have something that shows your coursework.
Absolutely. And yeah, so as she mentioned, copies of your certification, so that includes your basic life support, first aid, CPR, IV, whatever those are. If you have like that paper that says, I've received this certification, save those, save copies of them, digital and physical. I think she covered just about everything else on here. So that's a good basis to your portfolio. You can start thinking about different documents that you might want to include. Yeah, if you've received any awards, if you're on the honors program or something like that, you might want to include those documents in there. Just anything that can help supplement your resume and help just, show your well-roundedness and your accomplishments all in one, your professional portfolio. So that was good. Thank you, Dr.
When you're going to utilize this, so your resume and cover letter, all is that is to get you an interview, right? And so when you get your interview, if you go personally to an interview, you need to take this with you. Take it on a whatever you call it, and then take a physical copy. I tend to take enough. You will probably be interviewed on a panel, so I tend to take more than one, so that those can be. And sometimes I have before, just like maybe I remember once I was interviewed, it was a panel of 7. I took 3, I just laid them in the middle and people looked at them as they wanted to, right? And so, but also have that on a flash drive in case they want to use that. Since right now it is likely that you will interview virtually, you can send that portfolio in a zip file to your HR contact and ask them to disseminate it to the hiring panel, the interview committee. And so, ooh, that's good, Nick. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So then they can send that information, and that portfolio is then available to all of those people. Nick says that he started a job networking secret Facebook page for your former students. They post job openings at the facility, or if they need a job, and will post asking for leads. It seems to have been helpful. That's fantastic. I like that a lot. So get on that secret Facebook page. I love it. Okay. Digital submit to contact your HR prior to the interview. This is true. Consider adding a link on your resume if you've got it housed somewhere where there's, and if you don't, I mean, everything's just moving towards that. And so if you don't now, you will at some point have your resume out there on a cloud somewhere that people can just access it when you give them the link. So if you don't, we all soon. It is also good to have it bound in some. I mean, you can go to the office place and get those that just have the claspy things on, like it's a plastic, what are those called? Portfolio covers, I think, like just clear, and then it's got a little binding and it holds it all together. It doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, you can have a leather portfolio. I typically carry mine in a leather portfolio so that I have all those documents handy and can reference them. And that's what I take in with a notepad and pencil. We're not going to get to the interview section today. We're going to stop right after this portfolio part. But we were prepared if we had time to talk about job search. I'm sorry, Mark, that was his place to shine because he knows so much about the job search stuff for nurses. And then we were going to talk about interviewing, but unfortunately, we're not going to have time to do that today. But and I forgot where I was going with that. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah, take those with me to the interview. Don't have just loose papers all over the place. Still professional presentation, look pulled together. So walk in like that. Where are we at, Shannon?
We would be going into job search, but we're right at noon, so I think we need to wrap up. I'm just going to put Mark's contact information up here.
Yeah, put that up. So, Mark, I'm really sorry. Maybe we need to look at how to do this, maybe break it up and do it different another time. But I know Mark had mentioned he has a way to kind of review your resume with job descriptions. So if you're interested in knowing what that is, Mark's contact information is on the screen. Our general contact information is also that careerservices@nctc.edu. That email comes to me. And so you can contact us either of those. We are happy to review or give suggestions for a resume that you already have, or we can start from scratch with you and help you build it. That's what we are here for. It is very important to us and to NCTC when you graduate from one of our programs that you get into the career that you want. You're here for a reason, and we want that to pay off. And so please utilize our services. Let us know how we can help you. Shannon has put her email in the chat, so you feel free to email her as well. Since we're all kind of working virtually, we're all here to assist you. But I will say that Mark Kortz is our LVN and ADN career coach. And so he kind of works specifically with those employers as well as those students. But we're happy to do like a Zoom meeting or phone or shoot emails back and forth. Really, we're just kind of making it work at this point. So we're happy to meet you where you're at to help you get that done. I want to give just a minute for any last minute questions anybody might have before we wrap up. And Nick, do you have something?
Well, the only thing that I was going to say is I have recorded this, so the recording, it usually I'll get an email in a couple of hours saying that it's ready. For my students, I'll post it on your professional development course, the link, and for the other campuses, I'll forward the link to your instructors. And I was going to ask you, Daphne, Shannon, and Mark, do you want me to forward the link to you in case you could use this recording some other way?
Yes,
Sure.
that would be fantastic.
Okay, I'll include you on that as well.
And I can email you this PowerPoint. So if students want to go through the other sections, the job search and the interview sections, they'll have that as well. So I'll send that to you right away.
Yeah, that'd be great. I can upload it to their course.
Perfect.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. I hope that this was helpful. I know it's a lot, but I guess the main takeaway is we're here for you, and we really want to help you. And if we can do anything to do that, then just give us a holler.
Daphne, Shannon, and Mark, I've already sent you an email trying to book you for next year. Got plenty of lead time. We need to do this again.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And if we're back on campus, we could do it virtually like this for all 4 campuses, or if you want to go do it in person, I'm cool either way, but I got dibs on the date that I emailed you about.
Perfect. Sounds good. We enjoy this. It's a great way to connect with the students and provide this information. So we are happy to do it. Thank you so much for having us, Nick. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been awesome. Appreciate your time. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we can say bye whenever you guys are ready.